Hello, everyone, and thank you for all of those who stayed with us throughout the conference. For our last panel of the 7th Dr. Jasbir Singh Saini Chair in Sikh Studies Conference, we have the man who technically needs no introduction, but I'll go ahead and still introduce him. Dr. Pashaura Singh is Distinguished Professor and Dr. J.S. Saini Chair in Sikh and Punjabi Studies at the University of California, Riverside. His research is located in early Sikh history and scriptural studies, particularly the formation of the Adi Granth in 1604. He is the author of 4 Oxford monographs, including Life and Work of Guru Arjan, History, Memory, and Biography in the Sikh Tradition, that was on the bestsellers list in India. He has edited or co-edited 9 volumes, including the notable The Oxford Handbook of Sikh Studies. His recent monograph, A Dictionary of Sikh Studies, was launched on Oxford Quick Reference in 2019 in commemoration of Guru Nanak's 550th birth anniversary. To wrap up the conference, Dr. Singh will present on the growing pains in the field of Sikh studies in the Western Academy. Dr. Singh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tejpaul. Dear world audience, good evening and good morning. Yesterday, the morning keynote by Professor Michael Scott Alexander was indeed a breath of fresh air, providing us with a success story of Jewish studies on American campus. While the evening keynote by Professor Louis Fenwick skillfully highlighted the development of Sikh studies in the last few decades. Also, we had a thought-provoking panel on the history of evolution of the field of Sikh studies in the Western Academy in the morning session. And later on, a very stimulating roundtable discussion on the future of the discipline of Sikh studies. Thanks, Arvind, for organizing this panel. We learned a great deal of information on partition and the intersection of history and memory in the politics of conversion. Today, we had an excellent panel on the assertion of Sikh sovereignties in the face of state violence and a new effort to decolonize education on Sikh musicology. We also learned about the production of knowledge in Sikh studies. It's gratifying to see a number of graduate students who made presentations on their research projects. Indeed, a new generation of budding scholars is coming up in the field of Sikh studies. Equally important was the presentations made by Sikh community leaders on Sikh art, contributions of Dr. Narinder Singh Kapani, and on a fresh research on Sikh documents in Pakistan. I'm grateful to all the participants, both scholars and attendees from all over the world, for making this virtual conference a great success. I'm extremely thankful to my doctoral students, Tejpaul Singh Bainiwal, Jasbir Singh, and Adam Tyson, who worked so hard to sort out technical problems related to this webinar. They facilitated the smooth running of the conference. I owe a debt of gratitude to them. I also offer my sincere thanks to my staff members, Diane Shah, Diana Marukin, and Francesca Moreira, for taking care of important technical details of this conference. In the last decade, I had the privilege to chair 3 searches for endowed chairs in my own department of religious studies. Endowed chair in Jewish studies, Holstein Community Chair, and a chair in Jain Studies. I have learned the dynamics of endowed chairs supported by different religious communities. I will share some important moments from this experience in my presentation. In particular, when I was conducting moderating the candidates for job in Jewish studies, after the presentation, a lady came to my office and said very thankfully, thank you, Dr. Singh, for doing this for us. I asked her to sit down and I said, well, it's my pleasure. So I'm responsible for this search, but you have any concerns? She said, no, we don't have any concern. We are excited that a Jewish study chair will be established at UCR. So then I started thinking about our own community and other communities, where people would like to control everything, the search process or the candidate and everything, Also, I had the chance to chair the search of Jain Studies Endowment Chair at UCR. And the Jain community was so cooperative. They never interfered in any step at all. I also had the chance to sit in a meeting with the dean and a religious community, where the leaders of that community started making demands and that we want to control the curriculum, we want to do this, and this should be part of the memorandum of agreement. We listened carefully. Dean was very powerful and she said, well, you can keep your $1 million with you and we wish you best of luck. UCR is not the right place for you. So any community who tries to interfere in the academic, appointment, university rules do not allow that at all. So this is what, I want to share with you from time to time. For more than 3 decades of my academic career, I have been observing the growth of the field of Sikh studies from its very inception. Now I can look back with a critical eye at the external and internal forces that influence its growth, both in a positive and negative ways. This conference is dedicated to the memory of the late Dr. Narendra Singh Kapani, who was an avid supporter of establishing endowed chairs of Sikh studies. For this reason, I will focus on certain episodes in which his role was crucial in providing institutional support to promote the field of Sikh studies. Let me now turn to the main points of my presentation on the growing pains in the field of Sikh studies in the Western academia. Well, I will be speaking about the external affairs, interference in the establishment of a chair in Sikh studies, internal dynamics within the Sikh community, the UCR administration and the role of community representatives, the role of academics in the field of Sikh studies, and Sikh Foundation endows chair at UC Riverside in 2008. Then I will speak about learning from the experience of other minority communities. Then I will come to the creative phase with unique challenges in the 21st century. Then I will give you one example of one conference, 2013 Sikh Studies Conference on Sikh texts, practices, and performances. This was really a unique conference. I will speak about that. Then I'll briefly conclude everything. The conversation about Sikh tradition took place in 1976 when Dr. Narendra Singh Kapani and Professor Mark Juergensmeyer organized the first Sikh Studies Conference in North America at Berkeley. This was the beginning of scholarly attention to Sikhism, which was largely treated as a forgotten tradition in academic circles. Following this conference, the idea of establishing an endowed chair in Sikh studies in any North American university was first conceived by the Sikh Society of Calgary in 1979 at the suggestion of the late Professor W.H. MacLeod, who was invited to inaugurate the newly built Gurdwara at Guru Nanak Center in Calgary on Vaisakhi Day. The aim of the Sikh Society in inviting a Western scholar of Sikh studies from New Zealand was to build a positive image of the Sikhs in the host society. Professor MacLeod inspired the Sikh community to work for the establishment of a chair of Sikh studies at a Canadian university. He assured them that this kind of program would give academic respectability to the Sikh tradition within the academy and remove the prevailing ignorance about the Sikhs in a large social context. The work in this direction had started in 1980, and I myself participated in the fundraising efforts with much enthusiasm. The Sikh Society of Calgary, however, handed this project over to the newly formed Federation of Sikh Societies of Canada at the All Canada Sikh Convention held in Calgary in 1981. The Federation made an appeal to the Sikh community of Calgary in connection with their fundraising efforts for the establishment of a chair in Sikh studies on 20th November 1983, much before the 1984 events. As a matter of fact, they had passed the resolution in this regard at All Canada Sikh Convention 1983, held at Ottawa on 31st July 1983. They had already entered into negotiation with the Secretary of State, Multiculturalism of the Government of Canada and the University of British Columbia for the establishment of the program of Punjabi and Sikh Studies at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. However, the formal agreement was signed on 16th March 1985. And the first occupant of the chair, Dr. Harjot O'Brien, was appointed in 1987, only after some severe challenges of external interference by the government of India had to be dealt by the Canadian Sikh community. Let me briefly tell you this story reported by Robert Mattas in the Globe and Mail on December 13, 1986, with a caption, "External Affairs frowns on chair in Sikh studies." The Department of External Affairs intervened in an application saying to support for an education program related to Canada's Sikh community could harm bilateral relations with India. In particular, E.G. Drake, an Assistant Deputy Minister in External Affairs, wrote in his memo to Secretary of State official, quote, "While I fully understand that Canada's multiculturalism policies will be guided primarily by Canadian domestic considerations, the implications in terms of foreign policy must be taken into account, must be considered. I hope, therefore, that the Indian government's likely reaction can be taken into account before any conclusion is reached. Should federal financing materialize, it would likely be misunderstood by the government of India and might well cause damage to our bilateral relations with India. Under these circumstances, the approval of the federal grant of matching funds was withheld for almost a year because external affairs was under constant pressure from the Indian government. A few months later, the first and the largest academic gathering in Canada on Sikh history and religion in the 20th century took place on February 13 to 15, 1987 at the University of Toronto, in which more than 24 scholars and experts participated. As a prospective graduate student, I also attended this conference and I joined the Center for the Study of Religion in its doctoral program in the fall of that year. In one of the evenings, the conference organizers had invited Honorable Joe Clark, the Foreign Minister of Canada, to have conversation with the scholars and the members of the Sikh community. In his opening remarks, the minister told gathering how wonderful it was that Canada was home to so many Sikhs and lauded the century of Sikh presence in the land. He told the audience of all the wonderful things his party and his government had done for all people. When he finished his speech, there was muted applause. Professor Milton Israel, the chief organizer of the conference, stepped up and said, quote, "The minister has graciously agreed to answer any questions." At this point, Gurcharan Singh, the Secretary of Federation of Sikh Societies of Canada, raised the first question, quote, "How come the government of Canada had not honored its promise to match the funds, $300,000 collected by the community in order to set up a Sikh chair in the University of British Columbia?" The minister responded that it was not under the jurisdiction of his ministry, but he nodded at his staff to make a note of it and assured the audience that it will be looked into to see what the bottleneck was. Then the audience raised the question of bilateral treaty with India. In particular, the question about Sikh pogroms in New Delhi and other parts of India after Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's assassination in 1984, raised by T. Sher Singh, stunned the External Affairs Minister, who did not respond to it. It created an uncomfortable situation for him to continue in the discussion by saying, "I thought this was an academic conference." The moderator, Professor Milton Israel, tried to intervene by calling, "Sher, calm down." But T. Sher Singh was insistent on getting the answer from the minister why Canadian government did not speak on the issue of Sikh pogroms and human rights. The meeting ended abruptly, but its significant impact was that the federal grant for the chair in Sikh Studies was approved by the Secretary of State, Multiculturalism, and the search process for the candidate started at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. I have related this episode because I was in the audience to make sense of external interference in the establishment of a chair in Sikh Studies in an academic institution. Now I come to internal dynamics within the Sikh community. There is an urgent need to understand the internal dynamics as well as external factors for comprehending the processes of change visible within the Sikh community as a result of the tragic events of 1984, incidents that include both Operation Blue Star in June, when the Indian Army assaulted the Golden Temple complex, and the killing of Sikhs nationwide in November after the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Unsurprisingly, the year 1984 became the turning point in the history of the Sikhs in the post-colonial and post-modern world. Some scholars have overemphasized if not exaggerated, the impact of 1984 events on the different arenas of Sikh studies. They maintain that 1984 did act as a catalyst or an overriding factor in Sikh studies, both in India and abroad. For instance, Dr. Carl Hutterer, director of the Center for South and Southeast Asian Studies, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, presented a position paper in 1986 on, quote, why Sikh studies, underlining the fact that events since the army attack on the Golden Temple complex in 1984 have shown that Americans, almost without exception, are utterly uneducated about the nature of Sikh religion and culture, unquote. He made the case that the University of Michigan should be among the pioneers to include Sikh studies in its curriculum. As a result, the Sikh Studies Association of Michigan signed a formal agreement with the University of Michigan on 23rd July 1986 to establish a Sikh endowment fund to support a position in Sikh studies in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts of the university, including any chair in Sikh studies into which it may subsequently be converted. While appreciating the impact of 1984 on Sikh studies, we need to be sure of other issues contributing to its recent growth in the West. The growth of Sikh studies in the course of the last 30 years needs to be seen also in the context of emerging fields such as cultural studies, area studies, pursued in different Western universities. However, I may add that it appears similar to what had happened in the US after 9/11 terrorist attack. It is well known that 9/11 stimulated the large expansion of studies that deal with Islam or Muslim societies residing in different parts of the world. Even 5 chairs were established. 5 positions were established at University of California, Riverside in Middle Eastern studies. Thus, one cannot rule out the significance of such incidents in history, and the impact of Oak Creek Gurdwara massacre may have provided new impetus for the development of Sikh studies in North America. Since the early Sikh studies programs did originate in the context of the post-1984 events in the Punjab, the initial community response towards these projects was overwhelming. Through these programs, Sikhs of North America had expected to provide their youth with a university level instruction in the religious and cultural tradition, and to make that tradition accessible to the wider non-Sikh community. Meanwhile, a small group of Sikh scholars nurtured in the more traditional Singh Sabha mode of doctrinal interpretation became busy in the process of scrutinizing all research in the area of Sikh studies. Any kind of scholarly ideas and interpretations that did not appear to pass the litmus test of the authentic representation of Sikh tradition became the target of their polemical attacks. This organized group was able to exercise considerable control over the Sikh press and mobilize public opinion against scholars who were holding Sikh studies positions. Consequently, Harjot Obrai resigned as chair of Punjabi and Sikh studies at UBC in 1997 and shifted his focus to Asian studies instead. The community support to the fledgling programs in Sikh studies at the University of Toronto and the Columbia University in New York came to an end, resulting in the termination of these programs. We were able to save the Michigan program, but we had to face tremendous opposition from various quarters. I have already mentioned that it was Dr. Carl Hutter, Director of the Center for South and Southeast Asian Studies at the University of Michigan, who vehemently supported the idea of Sikh studies in 1986. However, 1 decade later, when the Sikh community had collected almost $1.2 million for the Sikh Studies program, the director of the Center for South and Southeast Asian Studies was a person of Indian origin, Dr. Hema Dandekar. She bluntly told me, quote, "We are not in favor of a Sikh Studies chair. We will support any chair of Indian studies." The most provocative question raised in the conference theme relates to the vocal opposition of ultra-conservative fringe groups in the Sikh diaspora that have managed to gain a dominant voice in community media, effectively trolling, harassing, and marginalizing progressive scholarly voices. We need to understand the origins of these fringe groups in the context of Punjab crisis. Undoubtedly, the censure of scholarly research is intimately linked with the complex political situation of the Punjab. As a result of Operation Blue Star of 1984 and the rise of militancy in the Punjab, the role of Akali leadership was marginalized within the Sikh community to a large extent. But in early 1990s, the Congress-led government in the Punjab crushed the movement of a separate state of Khalistan. The suppression of militancy created a vacuum in Sikh politics that provided an opportunity for the Akalis, particularly the Shromani Gurudwara Prabandhak Committee, SGPC, to stage a political revival. The scholarly controversy provided a handy tool for the SGPC leadership to assert its authority. Thus, they used the very powerful rhetoric of Granth in danger, in contrast to the famous slogan of Panth in danger, to regain their lost credibility. Both the external and internal forces within the Panth have used the scholarly controversy to mobilize public opinion. As Van Dusenbury has highlighted, that in the context of insecurities about their place in India and the uncertain future of their youth growing up in the diaspora, attacking non-conformist scholars fills a convenient ideological space, demonstrating the solidarity of Punjab-based scholars and diaspora professionals with contemporary projects of nation building and religious revival. Most instructively, the first polemical work directed against W.H. MacLeod's scholarship appeared in the form of an edited volume, Perspectives on the Sikh Tradition, in 1986, in which the editor, Justice Gurudev Singh, attributed extra academic motives to MacLeod on the assumption that Christian missionaries were out to undermine non-Christian traditions. J.S. Grewal painstakingly points out that Justice Gurudev Singh's charge that MacLeod presented Sikhism as, quote, only a rehash of an effete Hindu creed is not justified, since it ignores MacLeod's positive exposition of Guru Nanak's teaching, which in 1968 was perhaps the most thorough exposition of the theme in English. Further, Gurudev Singh's work also ignored MacLeod's appreciation of Sikhism as a religion of refined and noble quality. It is instructive to note that the appearance of this work after post-1984 events is quite revealing. Not surprisingly, the picture on the dust jacket of Grewal's contesting interpretations of the Sikh tradition, showing the destruction of the Akal Takht in 1984 by the Indian Army, rightly links the extension of the controversy with the agony through which the Sikh community passed in the last 2 decades of 20th century. This was the time when a number of Sikh critics of MacLeod's scholarship increased with the inclusion of retired judges, servants, army officers, former ministers, and vice chancellors who had access to the president of the Shromani Gurudwara Pradhan Committee, SGPC. MacLeod was seen as serving the interests of those forces which were inimical to the Sikh tradition and hostile to Sikh aspiration. Ironically, these Sikh critics successfully diverted the Sikh outrage against the Indian state for attacking the Golden Temple complex in 1984 towards a Western scholar and his associates. The political situation in the Punjab, however, must be placed in the larger context of what's happening in India in recent times. There has been a growing and scary tendency in India to try to convert religious commitment into political discipline. This is happening not only within the Sikh community, but also among Muslims and Hindus. One manifestation of such a tendency would be the enforcement of overt orthodoxy, whether in the wearing of symbols of commitment or very literal readings of sacred texts, or even fiercely protesting against the sacrilege of the scriptural text in recent times. Depth of religious commitment, it should be emphasized, may have very little to do with such matters. What is important is the number of potential supporters that one political bloc can show to another, all marching in lockstep and willing to vote or protest together. It's no wonder that in such circumstances, non-conformist scholars become the soft target of reactionary forces. It is, however, instructive to note that the kind of socio-religious controversy surrounding the works of the scholars of the Sikh tradition is not something new. It is surprisingly a frequent phenomenon and happens most of the time in homogeneous traditional societies. Thus, it is structural, political, and is similar to the experiences of scholars working in comparable contexts, such as the battles fought in the 19th century in Jewish and Christian studies, when the historicity of both the Jewish scriptures and the Christian gospel were questioned. The issues pertaining to South Asian modernization and diaspora provide the key to understand the true nature of such controversies. There are many conservative followers of Western traditions too, who do not like much of the academic discourse about their traditions. They have nevertheless adapted to the existence of that discourse, although they may ignore academic discourse as trivial in its disregard of real religious truth, Sikhi. They frequently glean insights from it despite perceived distortions. In the classroom, we frequently observe that analytical understanding helped many contemporary students come to terms with their own traditions and appreciate them all the more in their intellectual development. In the West, Sikh studies is a new field, and much of the reaction to scholars' works reflects the Sikh community's relative lack of experience with analytical understanding of their tradition. As that experience grows, Sikhs are likely to make adaptations and discoveries similar to those of their counterparts from other religious traditions, often ignoring analytical works as not serious, sometimes appreciating them in part. Let me now turn to some episodes related to the efforts of establishing a Sikh Studies chair at the University of California at Riverside campus. Although I competed for the position of an endowed chair in 2005, but due to resistance of Sikh community of Southern California, the establishment of chair was postponed. Even though I was appointed as a full professor in the Department of Religious Studies to teach South Asian religions, including Sikhism and methodological courses. In the fall of 2006, Stephen Cullenberg became the new dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. He took fresh initiatives to address the unresolved issue of Sikh Studies Chair. By that time, the Sikh Studies endowment had about $30,000 left to be contributed by 3 donors over the period of 2 years. There was also a concern that at least one of the donors have held off his pledge. Also, the administration was seriously considering 2 ideas. One was to use this money on Sikh conferences and other scholarly activities without the establishment of a chair. And the other was to establish the chair as named in the agreement. In a meeting with the dean, along with the chair of the Department of Religious Studies on November 16, 2006, I did my best to resist the first option in order to protect the establishment of the chair. Despite the administration's best efforts and intention, lobbying activities both inside and outside the university continued to the ongoing resistance to the establishment of Sikh Studies Chair. By this time, the university had started giving thought to returning the money to the Sikh Foundation. On August 22nd, 2007, Dr. Narinder Singh Kapani expressed sadness that the university has not made appointment of the Sikh Studies Chair. And that a small group of people have so much voice in this process. The silent majority wants this chair and other university chairs to be implemented. Dr. Kapani, it would be a real shame to return the money to the Sikh Foundation. As a leader of that foundation, he and others will support the university's appointment. Our department chair, Professor June O'Connor, expressed her deep concern to the Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences that the Sikh resistance community needs some real leadership from people like Dr. Narinder Singh Kapani, who might talk sense into them about the long-range picture. Quote, they are sabotaging themselves. The dean was straightforward. The administration response was straightforward. In Dean Cullenberg's words, quote, the decision has been made to not appoint a Sikh Studies Chair at UCR. Office of the President is looking into the procedure of how to return the funding. I think you should tell Pashaura the status of this decision. The role of academics in the field of Sikh Studies. The scholars working in the field of Sikh Studies discuss this matter seriously at the annual American Academy of Religion meeting held on 18th November 2007 at San Diego. Professor Louis Fennick took initiative to write a strong letter on behalf of other concerned scholars of Sikh Studies to UC administration, including the Office of the President at Oakland on November 30th, 2007. He signed the letter on behalf of Dr. Nikki Kuninder Kaur Singh, Dr. Tejpaul Singh Bainiwal, Dr. Robin Reinhardt, Dr. Balwinder Singh Pogal, Dr. Doris Jaquish, Dr. Michael Harley, Dr. Susan Prill, and Dr. Pashaura Singh. The text of the letter begins with a deep concern and dismay at UCR's decision to no longer appoint a Sikh Studies chair. And maintains that UCR, by so doing, may have appeared to succumb to the pressure offered by a very small, though vocal minority who had in the early 1990s successfully bullied the University of Toronto to abolish its own nascent Sikh Studies program, to the great detriment of students and scholars of the Sikh tradition. The third paragraph of the letter reads, as the academic study of the Sikh tradition is relatively new, the Sikh community has had little experience in dealing with the academic study of their tradition. What in other religious tradition is seen as serious academic scholarship is, when directed towards Sikhism, often misinterpreted, particularly by the vocal group mentioned above, as an attack on the Sikh religion itself, and subsequently an attack on the Sikh people and that which they hold most dear. Unfortunately, this situation has led to their taking a hasty stance against the proposed UCR chair, which is definitely not in their long-term interests, nor in the continuing interests of the Sikh community. A community besieged since the horrific events of 9/11. Indeed, such activities could well jeopardize the future of Sikh chairs throughout the collective academy itself. Hoping that this Sikh Foundation promise might still be realized at UC Riverside, the letter ends with a plea. We, the undersigned, would greatly appreciate if UCR would reconsider this decision, as it adversely affects all of us, professors, students, and those of us deeply concerned with the future of Sikh studies. This letter certainly had a positive impact on the thinking of the administration. On December 24th, 2007, the university administration had a conference call with Dr. Narinder Singh Kapani, who roared like a lion during the call and impressed upon them to establish the Sikh Studies chair at the University of California, Riverside. Most importantly, on January 8th, 2008, Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor Alan Vartela responded to Professor Louis E. Fenwick's letter, quote, we are in agreement that we will move forward in establishing the Sikh Studies chair at UCR. Sikh Foundation endows chair at UCR. On May 14, 2008, the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost Alan Vartela formally appointed me as the Dr. Jasbir Singh Saini Endowed Chair in Sikh and Punjabi Studies at the University campus of the University of California, effective April 1st, 2008. This appointment was in addition to my professional appointment in the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. And the letter says an endowed chair is one of the most important gifts to the higher education. It is an honor that fosters academic excellence and recognizes superior faculty. It provides invaluable financial support above and beyond salary that the chair holder uses in research, teaching, service activities, and conferences. It dramatically increases our capacity for organizing international conferences, seminars, and outreach activities. Betty Miller ran the story in UC Riverside newsroom on June 5th, 2008, under the title, Sikh Foundation Endows Chair at UCR. Pashaura Singh is appointed to the Dr. Jasbir Singh Saini in Sikh and Punjabi Studies. The chair honors the memory of the late Dr. Jasbir Singh Saini, who was known for his expertise in treating heart rhythm problems and served as the chief of the cardiology department at Thunderbird Samaritan Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona. It will go a long way to make Sikhs more familiar to members of the university community and will help break down barriers that exist between Sikhs and other people who perceive them in a stereotypical manner. It will help through its academic activities to erode the ignorance that now exists. It will bring academic respectability to the field of Sikh studies. Indeed, teaching about Sikh religion and culture will reach far beyond the boundaries of the campus and will play a significant role in addressing urgent community concerns. Professor Ewan O'Connor remarked that this chair is important to our campus because it provides in perpetuity the opportunity for students of every worldview and every religion to become knowledgeable about history, literature, music, art, religious beliefs and practices and debates, characteristics of the Sikh tradition in its homeland of Punjab in India and throughout diaspora. It is no wonder that the special interest group was able to mobilize Sikh community of Southern California to organize a protest against my appointment to the endowed chair at UCR campus on September 26, 2008. Following the protest, a delegation of 5 Sikhs met with Chancellor Timothy P. White. They presented a memorandum of their objections. The Chancellor assured them that if they could provide him with a concise statement of their objections against Dr. Singh's research, he would be willing to examine those allegations per University of California Riverside policy and procedures for responding to allegations of research misconduct, UCR policy 5-29-900. This policy directs the UCR Vice Chancellor for research, Dr. Charles Lewis, to review the allegations in his capacity as the Research Integrity Officer for UC Riverside. As such, he is charged with coordinating all procedures related to allegations of research misconduct by anyone performing research broadly defined under the campus sponsorship. As the spokesperson of Coalition of Gurdwaras of California, Raminderjit Singh Sekhon wrote the letter on November 7, 2008 to the Chancellor, along with associated documents regarding my academic scholarship, in which he asserted that Dr. Singh has published derogatory Sikh literature under the guise of academic freedom, academic research. The allegations were evaluated in detail by applying standard tests by Dr. Charles Lewis, and an ad hoc committee was made to go over my publications, all my publications, and it took over 3 months and time. He concluded his findings in the following paragraph, quote, "The university's policies promote the toleration of ideas. University policies do not provide a framework for assigning guilt for wrong ideas, nor procedures for apologizing to people whose authority has been defied. The focus of this complaint is then on limiting toleration of ideas, and the remedies requested are not within the authority of the university," unquote. In closing his response to Raminderjit Singh Sekhon's letter, Chancellor Timothy P. White explicitly stated, quote, "After careful review, I concur with Dr. Lewis that the allegation asserted by coalition fails to fall within the definition of research misconduct established by UCR policy, and that these allegations are not sufficiently credible and specific to warrant further investigation." And there was a press report, University of California, Riverside Chancellor clears Professor Pashaura Singh of all allegations of wrongdoing. Now, let me come to the point, learning from the experience of other minority communities. The most important question raised in the theme of this conference is about non-Sikh communities, how they have managed to negotiate similar dilemmas and problems, especially in the contemporary context when there is so much targeting of minorities, liberals, and dissent. Here, I would like to offer a comparison with Jewish community. It is instructive to note that there are more Sikhs in the world than there are Jews. There are about 5 25 million Sikhs in the world. By contrast, Jewish population is about 15 million. That makes about 0.2% of the world's roughly 7 billion people. About 40%, 6 million Jews live in the United States, 40% live in Israel, 10% live in Europe, 1.5 million, and 10% live elsewhere. This is Han Tepper 2015. It is, however, extraordinary that Jews have played such significant roles in shaping human development. For instance, when we look at the number of Sikh scholars or non-Sikhs working in the field of Sikh studies and compare it with those in Jewish studies, we become uncomfortably aware that Sikhs receive nothing like the attention which they deserve. How do we explain this wide gap between the two comparable minority communities? To answer this question, we must acknowledge some interesting facts. First, Jews are highly urbanized and they have an extensive interest in things cultural. Second, they have a recent past, which includes the Holocaust and the creation of the first Jewish majority modern state in history, the state of Israel. But then the Sikhs have a recent past, which includes the partition of India and the genocide of 1984, neither of which has aroused worldwide interest on anything like the scale of the Jewish events. The difference lies chiefly in who constitutes the Sikh Panth. Notably, the overwhelming majority of the Sikhs live off the land in the Punjab, pursuing objectives which do not rate scholarly research very high. Most instructively, in American higher education, some estimate the proportion of Jewish students in the top 20 schools, including those in the Ivy language, to be as high as 25%. Similarly, the proportion of Jewish faculty in American colleges and universities has been estimated 33% in 2013. In terms of representation in the United States government, Jews accounted for 6% of the House of Representatives and 12% of the Senate in 2010. As of 2013, 3 of the 9 justices of the Supreme Court are Jews. Jews appear in far greater numbers than in the overall population. They have access to the hallways of power. The President of the United States meets regularly with Jewish leadership. Most instructively, from World War II onward, Jews have steadily achieved more power than ever before in terms of both self-determination and cultural capital. Han Tepper, 2015. They have empowered their community through education. Almost all the major universities in the United States have endowed chairs or centers of Judaic studies. In fact, there are now about 200 endowed chairs or programs in Jewish studies in American academy alone. Now, let's come to the creative phase with unique challenges in the 21st century. In the last 2 decades, there has been a steady growth of scholarly literature on Sikhism. The first endowed chair in the University of California system was established at UC Santa Barbara. This resulted from Dr. Mark Juergensmeyer's unflinching support for this idea and the generous donation of Dr. Narinder Singh Kapani to establish Kundan Kaur Kapani Chair to celebrate the memory of his mother. Dr. Gurinder Singh Maan was the first chair holder. The Riverside Endowed Chair was the next occurrence, and we have seen its development. The increasing scholarly attention that Sikhs and Sikhism have been beginning to receive was a new development in the academy. Indeed, Sikh studies is no longer the forgotten tradition of the late 70s and is becoming increasingly recognized in undergraduate programs, as well as being the benefactor of a growing number of endowed chairs in universities across North America. As a matter of fact, there are now 9 Sikh study programs established in North America and the UK with the active financial support of the Sikh community. In addition, there are a growing number of scholars in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Europe, whose teaching and research interests are related to in some way to Sikh studies. In the beginning of 21st century, therefore, Sikh studies has emerged as a distinct area of scholarship in some of the North American universities. The new chairs of Sikh studies have been part of different university departments such as religious studies, global studies, and religion and philosophy, Asian language and cultures, and then literature, music, and the Center for Sikh and Punjabi Studies at the University of Wolverhampton in the United Kingdom. They have generally been funded by wealthy Sikhs in the diaspora. These chairs initially focused on issues of Sikh religion, ideology, and history. However, over the years, they have also begun to explore more contentious and contemporary issues of Sikh identity, culture, and social relation. This expansion of the sub-discipline beyond the study of text and ideology also points towards a growing confidence of the scholars, the institutionalization of Sikh studies, and acceptance of Sikhs as an important religious community at the global level. The most pragmatic question related to the practical steps that scholars in Sikh studies can take to ensure that their work reaches a wider audience in Sikh and Punjabi community. Recently, universities in the West have adopted the policy of open access to scholarly works produced by the faculty. Technology has made it possible that these works are available to everyone. The important point is that we need to remove much of academic jargon by writing in accessible language. For this purpose, we need to become more public intellectuals. In the face of scholarly controversies, we need to avoid a situation becoming a contest for primacy in the academic field within the Panth. Because of the domineering approach of some individuals, the field of Sikh studies has lost some brilliant scholars. Ours is a very small field that has yet to make its mark in the academy. To serve the field, we must stand by our colleagues against the onslaught of anti-intellectualism. Now, I would like to tell you something about one conference held in 2013. Its main purpose was to explore interdisciplinary approaches resulting from academic inquiries into Sikh texts, as well as the practices that surround them and their performance. The dialogue to be explored were made possible by the environment of the university, which served as a place where scholars from many fields and disciplines came together to pursue critical inquiries and comparisons. In many ways, the Sikh community has been very supportive of academic conferences, but though at times they have voiced outright criticism. Our hope for this conference was to provide a forum that focused on how academic discussions and those arising in the community at large could complement one another rather than being at odds. This conference was unique in many ways. For the first time, all the Sikh Studies chairholders attended this conference. And for the first time, the Chancellor of the university participated in these conferences. And for the first time, we had invited our critics, Sikh critics from India and from North America to be part of this conference. And they presented their papers criticizing Pashaura Singh and other scholars. But we gladly, everyone was, in a very jovial mood, and we enjoyed that conference. You can see this conference. And this was a conference where we also honored Dr. Kapani. Also, Dr. Kapani and myself, we honored Professor Christopher Shackle for his contribution to sacred language of the Sikhs and so on. And Dr. Kapani was so proud to receive this honor at that time. And the proceedings of this conference were published ultimately, in Sikh Formation, Encountering Sikh Texts, Practices, and Performances, essays in honor of Professor Christopher Shackle. And this was published by myself and Dr. Tejpaul Singh Bainiwal. Then, there's a, procedure, whenever I hold a conference, somebody objective assessment, they prepare a report of the conference. This report was prepared by Vivian Lee Knightley, Chair of the Department of Religious Studies. She writes, Dear Chancellor Connolly, Provost Robinstein, Dean Cullenberg, colleagues and students, and all that. With the third International Sikh Studies Conference now having drawn to a close, I write with a brief report from my vantage point as department chair, a great success. Although we did call for quiet police presence at one point on Saturday. The situation was quickly diffused and arose not from the community detractors or their Indian backers whom we had anticipated might be problematic. Rather, it was one or two faculty from another institution and their poorly mentored graduate students whose behavior deviated from the etiquette and deportment expected at scholarly conferences. Otherwise, the conference was remarkably civil and often very productive. Thank you to the UCR police for their measured and appropriate response when called. They were contacted when that group of graduate students appeared to surround Dr. Singh outside the conference room. Voices were raised and the tension seemed to be ratcheting up. A single officer's appearance reminded people that order should prevail and seems to have been all that was needed. The point that I'm trying to make here is these are the growing pains. When endowed chairholders pick up verbal, heated discussion in the conference itself, and poorly mentored graduate students create a situation that does not count well in the academy. And now let me come to, finally, I would like to focus on the proactive role of community representatives and organizations in the process of town-gown cooperation. The members of the Sikh community should always use circumspection in their approach without interfering in the academic programs of the university. If that happens, it will seriously damage the legitimacy of the program of Sikh Studies itself. From the university's perspective, any area studies or special chair has to be evaluated in terms of the institution's resources and academic focus. The Sikh community must share a commitment to the full institutionalization of Sikh Studies program, including regular liaison and the maintenance of a core curriculum involving Sikh Studies, Punjabi language and culture. From my 3 decades of teaching career at Toronto, Michigan, and Riverside, I can say this with pride that Sikh Studies Association of Michigan and active supporters of Sikh Chair at Riverside had never interfered with my academic freedom. We have worked together to promote the mission of Sikh Studies program. And I will end with the future of the global Sikh community. When we talk about what the future holds for the global Sikh community, there's only one thing that is certain. There are always going to be multiple understandings of Sikhs, Sikh traditions, and Sikh identities. This has always been the case in the past. This is very true in the present, and it will remain so in the future. Once this fact is incorporated into the Sikh community's dominant truth, its future will begin to arrive. Sikhs can contribute positively to sustainable security in totally globalizing world by their enthusiastic acceptance of extraordinary diversity of faith and practice. In the pluralistic and multicultural societies of the postmodern world, where stress is being placed upon liberty, diversity, tolerance, security, and equality of race and gender, Sikh ideals are thoroughly in place in the developing values of the global society. To this day, Sikhs conclude their morning and evening prayers with the words, Nanak Naam, Chardi Kala, Tere Pahne, Sarbat Da Pala. Through the divine name Nanak, we remain in high spirits, and in thy will, O true sovereign, may peace and prosperity come to one and all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. I just want to see, I want to see if there's any individuals who would like to offer any Q&As, but thank you so much for taking us through your personal experience and shedding light on that. I do, Dr. Singh, if you don't mind, I have a quick question for you, and I want to bring it up. Early on in your presentation, you discussed the external and internal interferences of Sikh studies. Also in this conference, Drs. Niranjan Khalsa, Upinderjit Thakkar, and Shinder Singh Thandi shared their experiences with the field of Sikh studies, as well as mentioning interferences in one way or another. Dr. Thandi also mentioned that Sikh studies has come to age. Meanwhile, in his keynote address, Dr. Michael Alexander mentioned that we need more honest scholarship, and I think in order to progress, we should be more critical about our own field as well. Dr. Thandi also mentioned, and I don't want to misquote him in any way, but he mentioned something along the lines of competition amongst Sikh studies scholars, which is saying something along the lines of it's natural among scholars. So I wanted to ask you, do you think healthy competition is needed, or will it hurt our field? Because while it is amazing to see more and more scholars, I want to be critical about the field and ask you, what are some shortcomings that you see within the field? And the reason I ask this is because we are joined today by Sikh studies scholars and community members from across the globe. And I believe by being a bit more critical about our field, hopefully we can begin identifying more of these shortcomings and then begin a dialogue on how to improve the field of Sikh studies.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Tejpaul. Thank you very much. And I was also listening to Dr. Niranjan Khalsa, and she also became emotional as I became emotional when Dr. Kapani's words, of sadness, he became emotional. And we face these situations. These are the real experiences of real people, And I have shared because we must have honest assessment of all the external and internal forces working behind the scenes, overt or covert, all the time. And it's not going to stop at all. We need to be more wise, intelligent enough to understand what's happening. So we need to recognize those forces. about the competition between scholars. It's always good. Everyone is, working hard in his own area of specialization. My view is that every scholar in his own field is an expert in that area. And in other areas, other scholars are expert in their own field. And this is the fact of life, and we need to be, appreciating each other rather than being in competition or trying to dominate the field in any way, to impose oneself on, when we invite scholars, they are our guests. Tejpaul and Gurbir and Adam, we spend months and months of organization and hard work. Staff is involved, everyone is involved. And we treat all our scholars in a very fine manner. We take care of everything. But when they start, creating situations in the conference itself, in 2015 itself, my conference was going on, and then again, my keynote speaker was, forced to withdraw from the conference. This is how, there are forces who are working behind the scenes not to see Sikh community or Sikh tradition or Sikh endowment chairs, succeed. So we need to be extremely careful and be sympathetic. I have always welcomed my critics, and all the time, and people have every right to criticize my scholarship, take issue with my scholarship, and I welcome that. Lou and I have disagreements at a number of points, but these are scholarly disagreements. They are not that we do not like each other at all. I was, teaching a course on sacred language of Sikhs in Toronto, University of Toronto, first course, when I started. In that course, Lou Fennick was my student, and he was sitting in that class. Also, I can tell you, my supervisor, Professor O'Connell and McLeod said, why don't you teach classical sacred language of the Sikhs to the Sikh community and to students? This was really excellent. I said, I have not used Professor Shackle's book. He said, well, just start teaching, and you will, going through this book, you will learn so many things. And in my class, Professor Joseph P. O'Connell, he used to sit in my class. Professor Fennick will sit in my class. And a linguist, Professor Henry Gleason, I think, who had worked with Dr. Harjeet Singh Gill, in the Punjabi language, creating grammar and on all other works, very top-notch linguist. He used to sit in my class. So through that, teaching that course, I learned a great deal. And Professor Gleason will come to my office afterwards and make corrections about my teaching. He will say, you should not just look at the wooden translations of scriptural passages. Try to inspire the students and the community members that they should go deeper into the meaning of this passage. Shackle's book is offering only one wooden translation. Go beyond that. And Gurbir and Tejpaul, both of you have worked with me on this course, and how we used to have multiple interpretations and understanding and translation. And Gurbir presented that course, in the last summer. He worked on online course on sacred language of the Sikh. So I know how hard it is, to prepare people for classical Punjabi, for sacred language of the Sikh. And when scholars do not really work in that area or in that field, and they are talking about Sikh studies and all the time, Sikhi, they must know all the original sources. You may have any theoretical framework, no doubt about that. You can use that framework, but at least you should have original sources. You should have Gurbani, understanding of Gurbani. You should have understanding of classical language. Dr. Sohta yesterday, he was pointing out philology and he was making comments on Ernst Trump's, work and so on. That's great, he should, maybe he will be able to explore how Ernst Trump was the first Western scholar who said, Sikhs have forgotten the importance of their grammar of Guru Granth Sahib, and they don't know at all. And that is a fact, You talk to any, Granthir, you can talk, ithe Ankar kyon, ithe Syari kyon, ithe, Gurbani has its own grammar. Bhai Gurdas learned all the Sanskritic traditions, at Agra and Kashi, and then applied those traditions, in the compiling of the Sikh scripture. There's a great deal of understanding we need to know. So critique of other scholars' work is most welcome. I encourage that. But we should remain. It should be academic critique, not polemically, attacking other people rather than attacking the argument. We are attacking the persons, and trying to say that extra academic motive on the person. So we should avoid that kind of situation. Rather, we should have, this idea, let's agree to disagree without being disagreeable. We may have disagreements, academic disagreements, and that's good. And I was sitting in the audience when Naranjan Khalsa, faced that unpleasant situation. I was there, I can see, she has not forgotten that moment, and she became emotional today, So how come, I forgot all the things, I am sharing these experiences because I may be for more some time, but ultimately new generation of scholars should be aware of all these, issues, controversies, and so on, We have been handling everything, but there are forces, who are working behind the scenes to sabotage our programs, and we need to be careful all the time.
Yes, and then I see that Dr. Pannu has his hand raised. So Dr. Pannu, I'm gonna allow you to talk so you can address the audience. So you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Sure. Am I audible? Is it okay?
Yes.
Dr. Pashaura Singh, thank you so much. What a wonderful speech. Highly inspirational as always. It's a pleasure to listen to you. I just wanted to, ask you this question. Often during my research, I reach a conclusion, but I'm unable to write it because of being scared of the backlash from the community. Being a dentist in the business, I sometimes keep thinking, okay, after I retire, then I will write down my conclusion, my perspective. So how do you suggest to someone like me who is into a private business, who's not into academia, but I'm holding my viewpoints, let's say talking about dissidents, like Priti Chand or, all these Meherban and all. I want to say something, but I'm scared that my work will get into unnecessary controversy. People's focus will change into the heritage that I'm working. But then I feel like I'm not doing proper justification to my research because I'm eventually reaching somewhere, but I'm not able to pen it down. So listening to you, I got some encouragement. I got a little bit of courage more. But do you have any suggestions for a student like myself, to overcome this issue and still stay non-controversial to a point, to a level?
It will never be non-controversial. Controversy will be there, all the time. You should be prepared for that. To work on the manuscripts of the Guru Granth Sahib, it's a very hard job. But I know now, Jathedar, former Jathedar for Akal Takht, Joginder Singh Vedanti, himself took me to Sur Singh, to examine the Sur Singh Pothi. I had seen Pairupa Pothi, these two Pothis are very important to understand the compiling process. And we need to understand, how, Bhai Gurdas and Guru Arjan were working on the compilation process, But the Sikhs say, no more research, no. So I know from my experience, but I have kept my faith and integrity in the academic world, because of my faith, deep faith in the Guru Granth Sahib, Guru Granth Sahib is Prakash in my room, So I read every morning and in the evening and so on. So that is a very, but those people who are, discouraging scholarship in that area, they should be aware that all religious traditions have, textual analysis done to their scriptures, So this is not a, rather we are in a much better shape because we have original manuscripts. We have Kartarpur bead, that is the original signed by Guru Arjan available to us. I have examined that for 5.5 hours, and then I was the first one to take photographs of Kartarpur bead. Now I have got more slides of Kartarpur bead. I know everything. All the manuscripts I know, you can sit with me. You have mentioned all the Bohit, Pindi, Lala, all the manuscripts in your comment, I'll be more than happy to talk to you and discuss all the issues, how you can handle the analysis of those manuscripts. Yes. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Yes, and then we have one more question from Nihal saying, I appreciate this conference's reflection on Jewish studies and wonder if Dr. Singh believes the Catholic experience, particularly the establishment of pontifical universities, might also be instructive. Unlikely as it seems today, can you envision the possibility and desirability of Sikh institutions establishing research and educational institutions that are at once Panthic and academic?
Yes, Sikhs can do, they can establish seminary type, Gurmat college or anything, they can do with their money, and that's okay. I'm not against that. But academic positions are very powerful in the world, You should not underestimate, to discourage academic appointments. And endowed chairs are its community's strength, power, scholars can use that position. We have been organizing conferences, this is our 7th conference, and other scholars are doing very good work, at Michigan, excellent work is going on. Santa Barbara produced excellent, literature and journal, and Gurinder Singh Maan did an excellent work, during his 16 years of at Santa Barbara. So we should not really downgrade that work. We should be proud of the work done by any scholar without, carrying any kind of grudge. So I'm very open. I'm very humble to meet anybody. So we should encourage scholarship. We should encourage Sikh students particularly to come forward and work in this field. I was too happy, when actually Professor Michael Alexander advised Tejpaul to come to Sikh Studies, and he was applying somewhere else, but he said, no, your right place is there. So, and Gurbir, came, and so I'm happy, because I can pass on what I know, to you, and then, who knows, we are just getting old and so on. So Sikhs can do parallel institutions. They can create. All religious communities have their own seminaries. Gurmat colleges can be very good idea. But academic positions are very useful to the Sikh community. But, there has to be some fully trained academics to apply for those positions. When you don't have Sikh candidates, then what can you do?
And then to kind of go along with that, it was mentioned by, I believe it was Dr. Upinderjit Thakkar, who mentioned, the differences between, or may have been Thandi as well. Someone mentioned earlier the problem between individuals working on their own versus consolidation of research for a broader research center in Sikh studies. For example, you mentioned there are 9 chairs in North America and the UK, with 8 of those chairs being in North America, and that you mentioned. but 8 of those chairs are, like you said, chairs, but then the one in UK was the research center. So do you think what is the benefit of a research center versus, these established chairs and individuals working on their own?
In this conference, for example, we have 7 people participating in this conference, all have joined. Balwinder Pogal wrote to me, that he is somewhere else, but he said, I would have loved to come, but I'm working on some research project, I will not be able to join. So that's okay, but he wrote me a letter, of support and so on. So we invited everyone, I think when I sent the call for proposals, it was sent to so many scholars, but those who respond, they have participated here. Some people just don't respond. What can we do? We have, open policy, we invite everyone and we encourage everyone. And we would like to, encourage Sikh students, particularly, to come to the field of Sikh studies and work really hard, because we need to have more scholars, sharp scholars, academic, intellectually strong, and at the same time, humble and following the Sikh teachings. So I have spoken my perspective today, to bring to everyone, what has happened in the establishment of a chair at Riverside, So it has gone through a long process. And the intention was to pay tribute to Dr. Narendra Singh Kapani, who worked really hard, doing every possible thing to attract, supporters for this position. He invited 5 academics, to write a position paper, and they wrote. Dr. I.J. Singh and others were, they're part of that, Inderjeet Singh from England, I have that document, Dr. Kapani was, trying to solve the problem, through any means, but he didn't want that we will lose when the university said, no, we are going to return the funding. That was the most saddest moment in his life. He was shocked. It's only when scholars working in the field of Sikh studies came to the fore, and they wrote we didn't put pressure on the university, and we didn't try to do anything. We respectfully, in a very humble manner, we said, this is happening, and this is the result of this chair, and so on. And that worked. And we should be aware of that, the scholars working in the field, if they stand together, they can achieve anything. Well, we should thank all our scholar friends and colleagues and people around the world who attended this 2-day conference, and we are grateful to you. We thank you very much. It has been a very exciting and of course tiring as well experience, but we are grateful and we are thankful to you. You can also thank as a moderator, Tejpaul.
Yes, I just want to take this time to also thank everybody who spoke and joined us for over these past 2 days. I found there was a lot of presentations that got me thinking more about the field of Sikh studies. So I want to thank all those scholars who participated and all of those community members who participated. And hopefully we will continue these conversations, and these conversations don't just die here, but we are able to progress the future of the field. And I look forward to seeing what the graduate students do, and more from the scholars as well. And I know Adam also wanted to say a few words in closing, and then also want to give Jasbir the chance as well.
I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Pashaura Singh. It was a wonderful and moving tribute to Dr. Kapani, and a tribute to doing academic scholarship in the face of whatever comes your way. That's just a lesson that I know that I'm going to take with me forever. So I do appreciate that. And also to thank everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure. And 2 years ago was also an absolute pleasure. And I thank you inviting someone who's from Islamic studies. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity, because there's just too little conversation that happens. And sometimes when you see other scholars in different fields talking about Sikhism, sometimes they don't cover it quite so well. And I think there needs to be a lot more interdisciplinary conversation going on. So I thank you so much for the opportunity. And to Tejpaul and Gurbir, who 2 years ago and this time, they take the conference and put it on their shoulders, and I get to see them do it up close and personal and watch them stress and sweat, but also pull it off and do a really great job. So I think they deserve a lot of credit. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam, so much. Gurbir, you have to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Dr. Singh, and the department for giving me all these opportunities to grow here as a scholar and as a student. And thank all the participants and panelists here for all the engaging conversations and presentations that were done. It helped me grow my mind and the knowledge I have. So thanks to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Singh. And I look forward to see everybody in person, hopefully in 2 years.
So we thank everyone again, and this is our final thanks to everyone. So Gurbir, you are the master of technology. You control everything, so you can say the last word and then just.
All right, it's been a pleasure, everyone. Hopefully we will all see everyone soon. Thank you once again, and we shall end with a fateh. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.